Hello, Internet. I am here to do an audio test and some game video for my first ever game blog. As I've said to several people over the last couple weeks, I've been thinking about doing this for a while. Primarily, I kind of want to start doing this for a game I'm really looking forward to in Starfield, because I think there's going to be a lot to talk about with Starfield regarding the history of Bethesda, and their style of game. There's going to be a lot to talk about in game. But in the meantime, I've been filling a lot of time that I had with Diablo 4. And it's a love it and hate it kind of game. So I'm just going to go through a build I'm currently working on. It's probably the most developed build I've done in Diablo 4. I spent a lot of time playing, but either the seasons have given me more lucky rolls, or I've just paid more attention in the seasons. Um, but this character is 76, and he'd beat the crap out of my 82, which I guess everybody kind of knows that. That's just the problem right now, is that certain characters like barbarians are just underpowered. Um, but I'm kind of happy with this build. I'm not a completist. I'm not a guy who needs to play the game to level 100 and beat the end boss. Um, I just kind of like the process of getting to the wall and not scaling it, I guess I should say. And really, with Diablo 4, the wall probably is right around here. Right around 76 to 80 is when you hit that wall where you're going to have to put in hours for incremental, tiny upgrades. So, this is going to be a bit of an in depth video. This is actually my second take on this. The first time I went through, I kind of sounded like a smurf on the other end because my recording was set up wrong. Then I learned my lesson, did some testing. Hopefully, this one will turn out right. If not, then I'll do a third take. Anyway, let's go through my Rogue McMenna and uh, explain to you this not meta build that I've been playing around with. First thing about this build um, is my primary room cleaner or clearer is Rain of Arrows. Most people don't use Rain of Arrows. I've noticed that a lot of the rogue builds just skip the ultimate altogether, which is interesting because with as much as the folks at Blizzard have been nerfing and boosting and nerfing and boosting, trying to get essentially every option to be a good option, I say with scare quotes. Mostly, they have been making all options bad options. They made it so bad, obviously, anybody who's familiar with Diablo 4, they made it so bad that they essentially had to nerf, just a blanket nerf to Nightmare Dungeons so that everybody can play. Whee! So, um, but it also opened up the door for me to play around with some different builds, which I guess is their goal. But in this case, Rain of Arrows is a pretty fun uh, skill. It's a little more skill than I'm used to with Rain of Arrows in most games because they're all stealing from one another, I guess, at this point. But most games, the Rain of Arrows is you just cast it and put a circle down on the ground and arrows drop on it until hopefully everything's dead. With Rain of Arrows in this game, it's directional and it's based on the direction your character's facing. I don't know if that's the same in console. I know that console gets a lot of help in targeting because consoles are very imprecise, and so console players need all the help they can get. So they get auto targeting, we don't on the PC. So with Rain of Arrows, the one thing I got to remember to do, and I often fail to do, is remember which direction my character's facing when I cast it. Because if I cast it while I'm running away without turning and making the conscious effort of facing the enemy, it will cast away from the enemy and I'll waste it. And since the cooldown is 55 seconds, I have some mitigation for cooldown, but it's not that great. I'll probably in a good playthrough, I'll get about 30 seconds between casts. But at 55 seconds, you cast it the wrong direction and it could be life or death, especially at the higher levels. Anyway, I'm going to go through real quickly my theory on this build and then show you it in action pretty quickly. So I'm going to jump to my inventory. So in my inventory, the gear that is essential for this build is Word of Hakan, which I guess most people who are familiar with the Rogue build have seen this. This is one of those uniques that is not so unique. I've probably gotten 4 of them to drop on this playthrough, and this is the best one I got. The skill for Rain of Arrows is pretty simple. It just says that your Rain of Arrows imbues your arrows with all of your imbuements. So there's 3 imbuements. There's Shadow, there's Poison, and there's Cold. And in this case, it will get all of them. And it will get them at the level you set them at. So when I go through my skill tree, I'll explain that better. I'm going to skip the Wrathful Hearts because those things are all going to go away at the end of the season, so I don't see the point in talking about them. Excuse me. So, I also have the Sky Hunter Bow. Sky Hunter Bow is useful even without those the Hakan, because the first strike from any marksman skill with this bow is a critical strike. Now, granted, it's a bow versus a crossbow. I know most marksman builds prefer crossbows because their base damage is higher, and that's kind of important because everything scales off of the bow or off of the base damage. So people don't use bows very often because they have a lower attack speed or a higher attack speed but a lower damage. And attack speed in any build is kind of useless. The only time attack speed is really useful, as far as I can tell, is early in the game. But when you're casting spells that have a set cooldown that scale off of your bow's damage, you want a crossbow. But in their infinite wisdom, they give our rogues no unique crossbows. So we have a couple of regular bows that do some cool things. Most people will go for the crossbow just because they go different ways to get higher damage, and I'm just going full meme on this one. But the first hit is critical, so I am pairing my skills with the extra damage to healthy enemies setting. So therefore, the first hit will get a bonus from healthy, and we'll also get a crit. So in theory, it will do a lot more damage that way. That's the theory, but I don't think the damage to healthy enemies is multiplicative. If it was, that would be insane. But it does give me a nice damage boost on top of my critical boost. But I don't know how much I'm losing because I'm using a bow instead of a crossbow. But anyway, it's the build I made. The rest of this, I could go through it, but there's no real point. Most of it is pretty basic. And none of it is optimized, so you wouldn't gather any good information from it anyway. In my skill tree, as you can see here, I've dumped a lot of money. These are the imbuements, Shadow, Poison, Cold. I've dumped a lot of points into the imbuements so that my Rain of Arrows gets more damage. And then I've dumped a lot of points into skills for poisoned enemies. So I do increased poison damage, and I take less damage from poisoned enemies. Because my initial attack with this build is putting down a poison trap. Well, my initial attack that's not a rain of arrows is going to be putting down a poison trap, which does a considerable amount of damage, but it's mostly for crowd control because one of the aspects I have uh, will knock down enemies. Well, actually, no, sorry, it's not an aspect. It's this right here. Uh, when my poison trap kicks off, it will knock the first enemies down. The ones who triggered the trap will get knocked down. On top of that, the aspect I have will create a vulnerability to any enemies within that range, and it puts down a uh, uh, taunt. Sorry, it put down a taunt that will draw the enemy's attacks. So in a getaway, it's kind of nice to drop the uh, trap because the enemies that are closest to you, if you time it right, will get taunted, and you can continue running. And then everything that crosses over the poison will take 60,000 damage from from the poison. I know most people who run the poison rogue don't run this, and there's good reasons not to run it. But again, this is a full beam build, and I'm just trying to figure out ways to minimize the harassment from the large groups of mobs while I fire off my rain of arrows. In a perfect situation, I'll be firing my rain of arrows into enemies that haven't seen me yet. But most of the time, I'm waiting for cooldown, so I have to fight them the traditional way, which is going to be dropping these traps and good old twisting blades. Most of the poison damage for the average poison rogue is going to be coming from twisting blades. Important thing to know about twisting blades is that it's the aspect that causes the blades to return and orbit around you that does do most of the damage. But it's the poison of those when they're imbued that really does the damage in late game. And you have to be imbued with poison when you cast twisting blades for the return blades that orbit to be poisoned. So, but I'm old. I'm not very coordinated. I often don't even have my fingers on the right keys. So, a lot of my twisting blades end up not being poisoned. But I still do all right, I guess. Dash. I don't really. Dash is over here, and most people will put it higher or lower on the keys so that they can reach it. Is more of my oh crap button, and I usually forget it's there. So because of that, and because I know who I am, I end up playing slower than most people. I don't put many points into dash, but it's good to have it when I remember it's there. Last, well, not last, but so Rain of Arrows fully upgraded gives me a nice knockdown for any enemies that aren't killed by the initial blast, but actually, I think in most cases, the only enemies that I've run into up to level 90 at least that aren't killed by the initial blast are going to be specific elites who have extra health or extra armor or whatever, and bosses. And even with them, because they're getting the imbuement, the poison imbuement, they're going to be heavily poisoned when they come out the other end. So then and that kicks off all my other poison bonuses. So that's good. And then I have precision. Now, the important thing about precision is good for the bow I have. Let's jump back to that and show you. It's good if you're a good player. I'm not a good player. But in this case, it's the second part of the bow's unique aspect that could be extremely powerful. When precision, every time you hit with a critical strike, you get a point in precision, and each point in precision increases your damage critical strike, I believe it was. Up to 5. 5 points of precision, which I think is a plus 25% to critical. And then once you get to 5, so these are critical strikes with marksman skills. Once you get to 5, the next skill is an automatic critical, which great. But the problem is with me is timing getting the 5th mark of precision and using that 6th attack to be rain of arrows. Because if I do it on the 6th attack, rain of arrows will attack twice. Not only will it attack twice, but it'll give me energy, which granted in the rogue energy isn't really as important as rage is with a barbarian or mana with a sorcerer. But the energy's nice, but generally any group other than a boss, if you manage to get that 6th attack to be rain of arrows and you dump it into a group of elites, it would probably kill all of them, and you could just move on. But I have a hard time coordinating that, so you won't be seeing it today, I guarantee you, because I'm just going to go in and shoot a rain of arrows so you can see what the effect is. Anyway, so that's the build. Paragon, I mean, I could show you the Paragon. Generally, it's just, I mean, other than maximum life, everything is extra damage. Everywhere I can find extra damage, extra damage, extra damage, I get it. Except for this, which is damage reduction. But anyway, I was rogues can be very tissue paper, glass cannon types. So I try to focus on taking damage reduction, even though it feels bad, man. But all of this is based on crowd control bonus damage. That's all. All right, let me just test it out for you here. There is a dungeon that is, I would guess, Blizzard's position would be, because it's too fun, it's bugged. So if you're playing Diablo 4, you have fun while you can, because it will get nerfed. But this dungeon right here, Damhain Tunnels, is absolutely packed with mobs. So it's a good demo for the Rain of Arrows. So I'm just going to jump over here. And show it to you. Jump on my mostly useless horse. Oops, should mark it where I'm going. This horse could have been implemented so much better. And I know they're talking about letting it run through the blocks, but it's not really why it stinks. Okay, fine. Didn't really get to see that one. What happens when you look away? Anyway, we need to just kill all these guys without their main arrows. It's funny because the rogue kind of plays one of my favorite action RPGs of the last 10 years or so is Warhammer 40k Martyr. Shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. I'm a big Warhammer fan. But Warhammer 40k Martyr is... again, I'm no good at playing video games. So I think Martyr probably has been my favorite because min-maxing was pretty straightforward. Skills were pretty straightforward, and the levels were pretty simple. But it was a fun game, and it really only used 4 buttons. And that was good by me. I could get by just essentially clicking 4 buttons as fast as you can, and you win, so long as you have the proper build. So I kind of liked it. Put probably about 500 or 600 hours into that game over the years. It probably seems pretty dated now. I've thought about going back to it since they've made some additions, but most of the additions don't really add much to the game. They haven't really expanded the skill sets other than adding new characters to play. But really, I got everything I needed out of that game. And the Rogue, to get back to what I was saying, the Rogue pretty much plays like your standard Inquisitor because of the 4 buttons. Maybe I'll do a video about 40k Martyr. Probably not, though. Alright. So, here we are in Domhain Tunnels. Full health. I'm going to want to see if I can get as many enemies on the screen at once so you can see this in all of its glory. Over here, you. And fire. Room cleared. That was actually a low body count for this dungeon, but it did a pretty good job of showing off what it does. There are additional aspects that I could add to this that cause essentially shadow imbuement, or enemies that are suffering from shadow imbuement to explode from cold imbuement, I guess, something like that. Anyway, they all match up, so essentially it would cause even more dazzling explosions on the second pass, because the first pass would get them imbued with all of the debuffs, and the second pass would trigger all of the aspects, and it causes a wonderful explosion. For those that are still alive on the second pass, most of the time they're not alive on the second pass, at least when I'm playing at equal level. But the problem is that because this game ramps up so much in damage taken, you really can't just dump everything into a glass cannon, because when you have a fully glass cannon in this game, they just die. You can't do damage. I mean, I should say, characters like the Necromancer probably can get away with going full glass cannon because they do a lot of their damage off screen. They just fire Bone Spear down the hallway and forget about it. And the Sorcerer, to a lesser extent, can do that too. And I guess if I was playing a different character, I could probably get away with some of that, but honestly, I just like seeing all the numbers and stuff pop up on the screen. You know, it's the dopamine drip of watching big numbers pop up. Granted, this isn't one of those builds that's going to give you 5 million crits or 5 million damage crits, but it gives you 4 million 20k crits. So it's dealer's choice, whichever one you'd rather. Oh, and hey, look. Oh no, sorry. Yeah, that's my precision is at 5. So my next. Let's try this out. Let's just see if it works. Well, I'll be damned, it did. I mean, now that I think about it, I guess I really could just sit here and hold shift and do. Uh, well, maybe not. Oh, I have to cause criticals. Never mind. I can't do that. But I just happen to be lucky. So there you go. That's what they call the Rainbow Rogue. That is the Hakan build for Rain of Arrows. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this doesn't come out sounding like Kermit the Frog. Goodbye.